Welcome to the Call to Meat Scotland podcast, where we bring you the latest insights from across the Scottish red meat sector, from the public body that works on its behalf. I'm Claire Taylor, your host for today's episode. Join us as we dive into market trends, brand communications and industry development projects in relation to Scotland's red meat sector, featuring experts, guests, farmers and stakeholders. Together, we'll explore the key facts and perspectives shaping our sector, keeping you informed and engaged with the ever-evolving landscape of the red meat industry. A very happy new year to you all, and we're kicking off 2025 with some very positive discussions around red meat, with the launch of the QMS Toolkit, and later in the episode we'll be speaking with Dr. Carrie Ruxton, a dietitian and one of the authors behind this brilliant resource, which spotlights the benefits of Scotland's red meat sector. But before we hear from Carrie, Kate Rowell rounds up an extremely busy few weeks leading up to the end of 2024 and reflects on some of the discussions which were front of mind at events, including the two budget announcements. And Iain Macdonald shares a positive outlook for the red meat sector, with beef and lamb prices looking very strong and demand for meat increasing. First up, I spoke with Kate Rowell. It's lovely to have you back, and we're obviously welcoming listeners into the new year. But before we get on to that, I know you had an extremely busy time leading up to Christmas since we last spoke to you, Kate. Can you share a little bit what you've been up to?
Yeah, hi Claire, and Happy New Year to everybody if you're listening to this when we're in 2025. As ever, November and the start of December leading up to Christmas were absolutely hectic as anything. They always are. It seems to be the time when people put a lot of events into the calendar. So yeah, I had a busy few weeks there. I was at the NFUS Autumn Conference and the Ag Awards. I think that was way back in October, actually. I was at the Winter Fair at ABP at Bridge of Allen, which was really good, where you get to see the carcasses that are entered in that competition and hear about the winners for that. So that was really good. AgriScot obviously took place, and it was really interesting to see and hear the First Minister there. I think the first time a First Minister's been to AgriScot, which was pretty good for the sector. I was at the Scottish Craft Butchers Awards. They do training awards for young people, so we support them in that because butchers are having just the same sort of problems as farmers are having in getting young people into the industry. So we work with the Scottish Craft Butchers to help with apprenticeships in that. So that was really good, and there was some really, really talented young people were winning awards at that. I made it to the Scottish Agritourism Conference. Again, that's something that we like to support because there's lots of people out there who want to work with abattoirs to get private kill done for selling things in their farm shops or in their bed and breakfasts or their glamping pods or whatever. So we like to support the agritourism sector as well. I was up at the Christmas Classic up at Thainston, where again there was a fantastic show of cattle up there and sheep, both fat stock there, so that was really good as well. And at the end of November there, the big project that we had was Lamb for St Andrew's Day. So that is an initiative, as I'm sure everybody knows, that the auctioneers started and really pushed, but we tried to support that as much as possible with help with marketing and things like that. So I was actually at the Parliament with George Purvis and Alan Hutchison from the auctioneers at lunchtime. I think it was the day before St Andrew's Day, actually, not actually St Andrew's Day. They have Scotch lamb in the canteen that day, and we had a little stand, and we were able to speak to quite a lot of MSPs who were coming in and out the canteen, talk to them about lamb, how important the sector is in Scotland, just discuss any issues, and then say to them, you will be having Scotch lamb today, won't you? Oh yes, definitely. So I think they sold out actually. So that was really good. So yeah, loads and loads on, and it's been good fun.
Well, Kate, you've not stopped. My goodness me. I mean, I wouldn't call this winding down for Christmas. And I think a lot of people tend to think the farming calendar begins to slow leading up to Christmas, where yours seems to have just heightened. And I guess all the things that you've been mentioning just there, it's so great to hear the positivity, because obviously with the budget being announced, both with the Labour government and obviously the Scottish budget in early December, that dominated a lot of the headlines. So sometimes these other meetings and events that you've been at, they didn't get as much of a mention. So it's great to hear there's been that really kind of positive feeling. What's the conversation been like at the events, and what have you been discussing?
So, all sorts of things. Obviously, the budgets, both of them got a lot of discussion. I did an interview actually alongside Martin Kennedy when we were at Agri-Scot for ITV, and while he can be quite political, NFUS are a lobbying organisation, I was there to sort of highlight the economic factors that are important when it comes to the whole sector, and one of the things that we would like to see done, and I don't think has been done, is some sort of cumulative impact assessment. There's all these different things, all these different policy things that are happening, budget things that are happening. Nobody seems to be looking at them all in their entirety, and we'd just like to see some work done on that to make sure that governments and policymakers totally understand how all these things add up and affect us in general. So that's one of the things that I've done. The conversations in Holyrood were really, really positive. I must say the MSPs that we spoke to were all really engaged. A lot of rural MSPs, but also some urban ones who we've had conversations with in the past. And I think there was actually a motion in the Parliament to support Lamb for St Andrew's Day. So quite a lot of them spoke at that. So that was really positive when it comes to the lamb sector.
I know I saw the photos from the day. I think it was the same week that you were obviously Lamb for St Andrew's Day in the Parliament, and then you had the rally outside. I was there too, and Martin Kennedy was speaking, and lots of people. And I think it was a really productive conversation. There was a lot of MSPs present, and obviously, like you say, many were there championing lamb on the 27th. And obviously, Lamb St Andrew's Day was the 30th. But it sounds like there has been some really great engagement that you've been having, Kate, as part of this. But of course, we're now in the new year, and hopefully a lot of people will be looking for some real sort of positives moving forward. January can be quite a difficult month as well. Can you share a little bit about some of the kind of positivity that QMS is positioning leading into the new year?
Yeah, so January historically has always been that month beginning with V that we don't really mention. We
don't mention it.
We don't mention it, but and that was a big thing a few years ago. It's definitely on the wane, but we do try to tackle that by not anything negative against that, but positive things. So we have toolkits that go out in January for stakeholders, for farmers, for anybody who wants to use, so that we can have positive conversations about red meat. That's the whole point of these, and we have a marketing campaign that runs along those lines as well. Obviously everything marketing wise up to Christmas is about making your Christmas as good as possible, having red meat whenever you can, all these sort of things. When we move into January, it's much more about have red meat because it's really good for you, it's really healthy. Everybody's turned over that new leaf in January where they're on a health kick. So the messaging changes. It's less about treating yourself and more about looking after yourself. And then, of course, we run that up until about Valentine's Day, when you move back into that special stake for Valentine's Day. So the marketing that we're doing, the new campaign was launched last year, and that's developing really, really well. And actually the team are on a high just now because they won an award for the marketing they did last year. So they're over the moon with that. Unfortunately, none of them could actually go to the awards ceremony, but when they didn't think they were going to win it, so when they did win it, they were over the moon. So that was really, really positive news for QMS and for red meat in general. We'll obviously be continuing having meetings with MSPs, councillors, decision makers, just to make sure that they get the facts about how good red meat is for you, and any economic figures, things like that we can give them. We'll continue with those. And we are going to have a report out. We're obviously we did a new strategy which was launched last year, so we'll be having a sort of report out towards the end of this financial year to show how we're hitting the indicators in that we said we would. And one of the new things that we've got coming up, we've always worked on reputation in general. So So marketing is very much to consumers to say, buy this product. But we also do separately sort of communication, reputation work, which isn't trying to sell people things. It's just trying to get the correct facts into people's heads, So it's not really to the consumer, it's to the citizen, if you want to say it like that. So we're actually looking to get a new member of the team to really focus on that reputation work. So that would be about, working to get across the facts about environmental stuff, sustainability, health, nutrition, all those things into the wider population, not just to the people that might buy it, so that it all almost become, that you're talking about schools, you're talking about youth groups, you're talking about anybody really who wants to listen. So that's a really exciting thing that we've always done, but we're ramping that up because it's so important next year.
Oh, well, there's lots ahead, Kate, and even just the first thing that you said there was about going into January, the V word. I was just thinking there's an infographic that QMS brought out in, I think it was November, that showed there was an 8% increase in spend on red meat. I mean, if that doesn't tell you itself that there's such a demand. That was just, when I saw that, I thought, what a wonderful figure to be sharing. And we've got Dr. Carrie Ruxton at the end of this episode is going to be sharing about the toolkit, and again, like those messages that you're talking about, getting those facts out there around the positives of red meat. So it's great that we're going to be having lots of conversations about that, and I can tell already the next few episodes of the podcast are going to be getting our teeth into a lot more on this discussion. But Kate, Happy New Year to you too, and thanks so much for joining us back in the new year.
Thanks very much, Claire. Happy New Year, everybody.
Next up, I spoke with Iain Macdonald for a domestic and international markets update. Iain, thanks so much for joining us again on the podcast. And we're having this chat end of December, but of course our listeners are hearing this at the beginning of January, and it's been quite a change where we were at with prices for beef this time last year. Can you fill us in a little bit of where we're at right now?
Yeah, so I guess that'll be one of the kind of hot topics at the moment is just the beef market, and it's being very strong increases week on week for months now, really. It's quite, I guess, interesting that last year the market was almost completely flat in the final quarter. This year we've not really had a fall in supply yet. Slaughter still seems to be holding up, but we've seen those rapid price rises, which really tells you a story that demand is there. We know exports have been pretty strong this year, and there must be some domestic market impacting on that as well. Retail's been kind of positive, although maybe not, the figures have maybe not been, had not been sort of highlighting this kind of jump in the beef market. So maybe it's more those that kind of manufacturing grade beef as well. Burger markets, all those other parts of the sort of the demand chain that have been driving things higher. And that's I guess a sort of positive signal for producers.
Very positive signal, and what a great way to sort of start January in a very different position to last year. And is it similar for lamb and pork?
So lamb has also been a strong market this year. We've had very tight supply with a lower lamb crop across Britain. Kind of, I guess, a sort of difficult lambing period for a second year in a row. So that's really ensured that supply has been tight. Export demand has been strong from Europe because their supply has also been declining in recent years. And market's been strong and absorbed a big increase in imports, which is quite interesting as well. There's been a lot of fear that higher imports from Australia following the trade deal would, I guess, destabilise the market, but it's kind of been absorbed at the moment.
I definitely want to come back to the lamb crop and talking about Australia there as well a little bit later on, but can we touch first of all on the pork market, and then we're going to get on to a bit on the budget, Iain? Yeah,
so pork market, I guess of the three species, it's the one it's not seen higher prices than last year. Prices have been a little bit lower than last year. However, with cost of production being down a bit for producers, then I think it's still a fairly positive environment at the moment. I guess the interesting thing on the pork side is that there's been quite a huge differential in price between Britain and Europe at really throughout the second half of this year, and it doesn't look like imports have increased despite that big kind of competitive difference.
And we have to touch on the budget because that was really dominating conversations, both the October budget and then moving into our own one in December. What's your sort of message coming off the back of that, Iain?
Yeah, so I think the challenge is that kind of cumulative impact. There are obviously a lot of changes in there in the UK budget, and potential for I guess a negative impact on production costs and also confidence, which is kind of worrying at a time when we've already seen livestock populations decline, but demand is really strong. So we've kind of got a lot of opportunity in this sector for kind of driving economic growth, but maybe not those signals really coming through from the budget, which is that's the concern. And I was just going to also add that Scottish budget looks like agricultural budget fairly flat, which I guess is kind of positive if you're looking at compared with rest of UK where agricultural policy kind of changed. We've still kind of had more stability in Scotland. Obviously, I think some people maybe want a bit more money to go into the sector, but I guess stand on is kind of fairly positive.
No, that is good, but then you have said about that reduction in confidence slightly, which we've seen reflected in the livestock numbers. And I know we were talking before this, Iain, that there's been a 12% decline in the Scottish beef herd in the last decade in Scotland. But this isn't just here in Scotland, is it? I mean, you're seeing these numbers around the world and this sort of trend of decline, aren't you?
Yeah, it's definitely not just in Scotland. So America, they've kind of been through a production cycle where they had a couple of years of drought and they lost a lot of beef cows, so their production's fallen quite sharply in the last couple of years. They've maybe managed to hold on a little bit this year through increased carcass weights and maybe animals going to slaughter a bit early as well. But they're looking at big kind of declines coming through in 2025. Brazil, I think they're also expected to go into that kind of sort of downtrend in production with kind of some herd liquidation this year. I think USDA is predicting a small fall in global beef production next year and increased trade as a result, with those kind of imbalances leading to increased trade. So should be a lot of opportunity out there for companies all over the globe really that are interested in trading their products.
And you mentioned earlier about the trade deal with Australia and New Zealand. I mean, where are we at with that just now?
Yeah, so I guess most of the focus has really been on the lamb side, but also we've kind of seen on the beef side, we've started to see imports start to pick up a bit from both those countries since trade deals, although still I think maybe only 4% of total imports in the first 9 months of this year, so still relatively small on the beef side. On the lamb side, we've seen really strong rise in imports this year, but certainly the market's been so tight that it's really absorbed those imports, and it's not certainly not affected farm gate prices. Well, I guess you could argue if those imports hadn't been there, then farm gate prices would have risen even further, and then retail prices would have had to rise even further than they have. But certainly at the moment we've seen rising retail prices, but it's not really affected demand, which is a positive story.
And just sort of ending again on another positive story, you were saying just before we recorded this, Iain, that in terms of lamb producers, things are looking quite bright for sort of some particular periods coming up around Easter. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so this year, so with the Islamic calendar, it sort of moves, so the festivals kind of move a little bit further forward or a little bit earlier in the year each year. So this year Ramadan starts, I think it's right at the end of February, and then our Easter is obviously moves a little bit as well, and it's a bit further back, so we've almost got kind of a longer period of time covered by festivals, right away from the end of February up until I think Easter's middle to late April this year. So potential for a kind of prolonged period of extra demand in the market for lamb.
Amazing, Iain. Thank you so much for sharing. Lots of positivity going into the start of the year. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thanks.
QMS's 2025 Toolkit has been officially launched. and it contains lots of useful resources to help us spark more positive conversations about Scotch beef, Scotch lamb and specially selected pork. And it contains all sorts of infographics, nutritional advice, recipes and much, much more. And I am joined by Dr. Carrie Ruxton, who's a dietitian and one of the authors of the Toolkit. So Carrie, welcome to the podcast, and it'd be great to, first of all, just hear a little bit about you and your background and why you're involved.
Thanks, Claire. It's great to be here. Well, I trained as a dietitian at Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh many years ago, and I also did a PhD there focusing on child nutrition. Since then, I've had quite a varied career. I've worked in hospitals, industry, and academia, but I've now been freelance for more than 20 years. And my work, apart from the job that I do with QMS, involves translating and communicating the science on nutrition and health. And I could be working with trade bodies, I could be working with public bodies and also with food industry companies as well. So I do all kinds of things with all the types of companies. It's a very varied job. I've also written some strategies as well. So I did the healthy weight strategies a few decades ago for some of the NHS boards. So I'm kind of coming at it from a communications but also a policy angle.
It's so interesting, your background, Carrie, and so relevant when it comes to these conversations, because I think so often we are quite nervous about approaching conversations about red meat. There's a lot of sometimes criticism directed at the industry, and it's about managing to balance the facts, have the evidence, but to do that in a way that's really digestible and comfortable to do so. And I know that's a lot of work that you've been focusing on is managing those conversations. Can you tell us a little bit about the toolkit and how it really plays into having those easier conversations?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I was just posting about it recently on LinkedIn because I find myself bombarded with information, often contradictory information about how much of greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture in the UK, how much comes from meat, whether meat is healthy or not healthy. And there's so many people out there with different opinions. And I think we have to be a little bit suspicious about where some people's opinions are coming from as well. Often they are campaigning for certain things themselves due to their own beliefs or diets that they've chosen to follow. And it's very, very difficult for somebody, just an ordinary member of the public, to navigate that. I mean, I have enough difficulty myself as a healthcare professional. And what I really like about the toolkit is it's got verified information from expert bodies, from government. It's good quality information. And it is responsibly communicated in nice little nuggets. You don't have to kind of delve into it. It's all there in the visuals and infographics. So I find it very, very easy to use. And I really would urge people to click on the links and go and have a look at it.
And just coming back to that initial comment you said about the kind of mass information that's out there, and it can be, it can be very difficult to navigate this space. And from you working within this sector, what are some of the common myths that you really hear that are associated or really directed at the red meat industry?
The big one that I hear, Claire, is that a lot of the data floating around comes from international bodies such as FAO, and organisations who are very much dominated by North America. And so when you're looking at things like climate impact, they're not taking into account the circumstances in the UK. So we're really, really lucky in Scotland, for example, that even though we have 80% of our land is so-called less favoured, it's very well suited to livestock. So we've got hills, we've got fields full of grass, we have forests as well, but we've got land that's very much suited for livestock. And then you compare that to some parts of the world where animals have to be fed on feedlots because there isn't natural pasture. You've got a lot of countries that are very dry, that don't have the rainfall that we have in Scotland. So we're not actually looking at the UK and the Scottish perspective. And also we have other industries. For example, we've got a very healthy holiday industry. So there's lots of people flying all over the place on holiday, and that wouldn't necessarily be the case in some countries as well. So I think that when we're looking at the impact of red meat on climate, when we're looking at the impact of red meat on health, we really need to drill down to the UK perspective and use UK data. And that's the great thing about this toolkit. It's not international data, it's UK data. Some of it is Scottish data as well. And that's what's most relevant to the Scottish consumer trying to make up their minds about, should I eat meat? How much meat should I eat? How often? And we know that if we're getting data that's relevant to us in Scotland, and we're choosing products such as Scotch and specially selected that are relevant to the Scottish consumer, then we're going to get much better information.
So what is some of the information that is involved in the toolkit that really shows that differentiation of place and here in Scotland?
Well, some of the things that jump out for me, because I'm not just interested in nutrition, I'm interested in climate and biodiversity as well. And it's a big one for me that when I look at the pie chart, which shows the impact of agriculture on greenhouse gas emissions, I can see that 88% comes from other things. So quite often, meat and agriculture and farmers are just being blamed for a problem that is actually coming from other sectors, for example, energy and transport and domestic heating and the things that we buy. I mean, particularly, we've just had Christmas and we've probably bought a lot of stuff and had it posted from all over the world. So there's 88% to play for of things that we can do as consumers to try and cut down on greenhouse gas emissions. And actually, agriculture is making a relatively modest contribution to that. And we've also got data from the toolkit that shows that that contribution is reducing. So farmers are already doing their bit. Other things that have really jumped out at me from the toolkit is the nutritional role of red meat in the diet. So we know that red meat is nutrient dense, which means that it packs a punch in terms of the nutrients that it provides in a portion. We know that meat's got lots of different B vitamins, which are good for energy and reducing tiredness and fatigue. It's got zinc for immunity. It's got protein for supporting and building muscles. It's got phosphorus for bone development in children, and also iron for cognitive function. So that's telling me that meat is a fairly unique product, really. It's a natural product, but it's also delivering all these nutrients which the human body needs.
That nutritional role is so important, and it is often missing from conversations these days, they tend to be more focused on the environmental impact. And I was fascinated with one of the facts I saw in the toolkit, which talked about NHS guideline recommendations for iron. And I was so surprised that, not totally surprised, but quite surprised that women needed significantly more iron than men in some of the figures that they were giving. I mean, is that something you think will be a shock to people if they read some of the figures? 'Cause I think it said something like 8.7 milligrams recommendation for men daily, 14.8 milligrams for women.
Yes, that's right. And I think the toolkit is also reporting on a consumer survey where the majority of women were not aware that they needed more iron and that iron could be a problem nutrient for them. The reason women need more iron during the childbearing years is because they lose iron through the menstrual blood. So every single month, women are having periods on the whole, and they're losing iron. And what we found when we look at things like the National Diet and Nutrition Survey is that 1 in 10 women and girls are iron deficient, and 4 in 10 have got very low iron stores, which means at times of their life, if they're not eating enough iron from the diet, or if they're perhaps very physically active or have very heavy periods, they will be at risk of tipping into iron deficiency. And when you're iron deficient, and I can speak from experience because in my 40s I had a lot of issues with iron deficiency, you will feel breathless if you try and run up the stairs or do any physical activity. You will have brain fog, you'll be lacking in energy and just feeling very fatigued and a bit low in terms of your mood. So it does have a real impact on women's lives. And I think that iron is something that is very important to women. And yet women are the ones that are always being encouraged to follow faddy diets and give up different food groups. So I really would urge women to get that red meat into their diet. And if you have something like a glass of orange juice with your meat meal, that boosts your iron absorption from the other foods in your diet, such as beans and pulses, and you're getting more iron overall.
How fascinating, a top tip around orange juice there. And I guess talking about the diet fads, I mean, it's January. We often see this time of year, there is a bit of a trend to reduce meat consumption. And I've spoken with experts in the past around the bioavailability of certain vitamins depending on what you're consuming, whether it's plant-based or animal-based proteins. Can you share a little bit about that and why red meat can be such a positive choice?
Yes, certainly. So it's not just iron that red meat's good for, and red meat, the iron in red meat is actually 3 times better absorbed than you would get from something like spinach or beans or pulses. And also the zinc in red meat is particularly well absorbed as well, and that is very important for immune function. People can do well on plant-based diets. It's absolutely true that they can do well, but you just have to work a lot harder. And the more foods that you're cutting out of the diet, the more dietary supplements you have to take to bridge that gap. And the great thing about meat is it does contain quite a variety of nutrients in a form that our bodies can absorb very easily. And so it's much easier to meet your nutritional needs. And actually, the Food Standards Scotland did a very interesting report in 2024 where they were modelling, they asked Edinburgh University to model different meat intakes, and they looked at cutting meat by 20 to 30% and the impact that would have on nutrient intakes in the Scottish population. And they found that quite a few nutrients would significantly reduce, and that population groups that were already low in certain nutrients were doing worse once they'd started to cut meat out of their diet. So we know that meat is very important, and we know that there are issues with cutting it out, that you do have to then turn to supplementation and fortified foods to bridge those gaps.
When it comes to sort of recommended daily amounts of meat, what would you recommend in terms of how much red meat that an individual should be consuming?
Well, we should be aiming for 500 grams a week of cooked red and processed meat, and that's the UK government's recommendation. They also suggest that people with very high intakes, which they have classified as over 90 grams a day, should reduce down to 70, which is about the size of a deck of cards. So my idea would be that, if you know that you're eating huge amounts and not eating a lot of veg, that's obviously very unbalanced, and we want to get more people eating a moderate amount and then adding their fruit and vegetables so that they're having their 5 servings a day. We know from the data that most people are already now eating close to that 70 grams a day. So people have reduced meat over the last 20 odd years in the UK, and most people are now eating the right amount. So it tends to be men, particularly middle-aged men, that are eating the higher amounts still. And in fact, women and children are eating very small amounts. So I always joke with my husband and others that women and children should be eating more red meat and middle-aged men should be eating a little bit less.
I'm sure a lot of people will be listening and thinking, "Oh, I don't know about that," listening in. But Carrie, is there a difference between the type of meat we should be eating? Because obviously there's many different types of red meat, and obviously there's lots of conversations are often around more processed meat. What would you be saying around that sort of distinction?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, meat is so different across the board in terms of different recipes and cuts of meat and types of meat. I always suggest to people that they keep the processed meat to a minimum. So that's not only the bacon and ham, which can be high in salt and also preservatives, but things like meat pies, even the beloved Scotch pie that we have up here is not very healthy. And what I would recommend is that people go to their supermarket or butcher and they look for Scotch or specially selected, and they pick a nice piece of lean red meat Pork, for example, can sometimes be less than 3% fat, which is very low in fat. And you can get lamb cuts that are lower in fat, like leg of lamb. You can get 5% minced beef that is at the lower end of fat. So really, there's all kinds of cuts of meat out there. If you do like a bit of fat and a bit of marbling, that's fine. You can just skim off the fat when you cook it to try and reduce the fat in the actual meal. And I always recommend as well just adding lots of veggies and even beans and pulses to your meat, because not only does it make the meat dish a lot healthier, but it also makes it last longer. And in these days when we're watching our pennies, your meat meal can then last a lot longer if you put the veggies, beans and pulses in it too.
And I have to finish by asking you, Carrie, you're a dietitian, I'm sure you're asked all the time, what will you be cooking when it comes to sort of taking in all this different advice? What will you be making? Is there a recipe you can share with everybody?
Well, I've got a few favourites. So for lamb, I like to put it in the slow cooker with chickpeas, spices and tomato sauce and make a kind of a Moroccan dish. Pork has to be pork medallions. I absolutely love them, and I fry them in a little bit of rapeseed oil and have them with broccoli and boiled tatties. If I'm having a quick meal, I might have an omelette with a bit of ham and some veggies in that as well, like peas and potatoes. And for beef, it always has to be a steak for me. I like my steak medium rare with a nice big salad. So lots of options there for everyone.
You've given everyone lots of inspiration, and thanks so much for sharing so much information about what's in this toolkit and lots of recommendations and ideas we can take forward. And I'm sure it's given lots of people lots of food for thought. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you for tuning in to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen for more monthly episodes as we continue to explore the vital topics affecting the red meat industry. If you want to stay updated with the latest news in our sector, be sure to sign up for the weekly QMS newsletter by emailing info@qmsscotland.co.uk. Join us next time for more insights from experts, farmers and industry leaders. But until then, stay connected with us on our social channels and keep up with the latest news from Quality Meat Scotland.